My mother-in-law constantly humiliated me, causing my husband to cheat on me. My name is Kate, and my path was full of surprises and trials that I did not even suspect when I first met Chris. We met at university. He was studying economics, and I was studying psychology. Chris was a charismatic and charming guy. He always knew how to cheer me up. With him I felt happy and was looking forward to every new meeting. At the beginning of our relationship, we spent a lot of time together. He inspired me, talked about his ambitions, his plans for the future. But nothing is perfect, and soon, like a thunderclap, I faced the most serious obstacle in our way, his mother. She was a woman of strict views and even stricter principles. She always expressed her thoughts in rigid terms and was not shy about sharing them with others. She was an authority and dreamed that her son would marry a girl from the right family, with higher education, from a wealthy family, and she herself would be at least decent. I was just a simple girl from a poor family, and this status did not suit her at all. My son, of course, had no idea of her secret plans, and when he first introduced me to his mother, I was sure that she would treat me normally. But in fact, when she saw me, her look changed to one of displeasure and doubt. I felt contempt for myself. She clearly wasn't going to give me a chance to show what I was really like. Our relationship had progressed despite all the obstacles and her cold demeanor, but Chris and I were truly happy together. But the doubts kept haunting me. Every time I tried to talk, she looked at me as a troublemaker, ignoring all attempts at openness and friendliness. Her animosity and ill will were so obvious that even Chris noticed the strained relationship between us. I didn't understand why she couldn't just be happy for her son, who was happy. Trying to maintain communication with her seemed like a real game of survival to me. Every time we visited her, I froze in anticipation of her rebuke. This woman often asked me uncomfortable questions about the future, and I felt like she was just mocking me. I tried to see her as just a caring mother, but when this demanding woman stood across from me, I felt like she was hiding her real motives. I still sought her approval, but it was going nowhere. She would ask me what I was going to do after graduation, and there was a slight sneer in her voice, as if she was interested in watching me make excuses. Every time I insisted on my choice, she just shook her head, as if she were a little kid who didn't understand anything about life. The more she pushed me, the more I realized that I wasn't going to let anyone ruin our love. Chris was supportive, and that kept me fighting for the relationship. I hoped that time would smooth over his mother's displeasure, but I couldn't avoid her judgmental looks. It went on like this for months. Every meeting with her was like one big ordeal for me, and I felt humiliated, constantly facing her prejudice. All I wanted was for her to realize that I could be a good wife for her son, despite our different social statuses. I tried to talk about my feelings, but it didn't get me anywhere. At such times, I felt miserable and I was gripped by the fear of loss. I didn't want my mother-in-law to ruin our relationship. Despite all the obstacles, we decided to get married. Chris was determined and I was hopeful. On our wedding day, my mother-in-law came, but her face did not express joy. She only remained silent, looking at us with arrogant disdain, her gaze full of reproach. She did not hide her displeasure, condemning our choice. I tried not to give in to negative emotions, realizing that this day was ours, it was our happiness, and I would not let anyone, even the strictest mother-in-law, destroy this romantic atmosphere. As we exchanged vows, excitement swept over me. I listened to Chris's words, which sounded so sincere that it was as if the whole world had stopped to hear just us. We vowed to be there for each other, to support and love each other. I thought the most important thing was our union, and the rest would somehow work itself out. Even before Chris's proposal, I often heard him talking to his mother, in which she reproached him for choosing me. She assured Chris that I wasn't worthy of him. Despite this, he took me as his wife against all odds. At that moment, I felt on top of the world, believing that together we could overcome all odds. But as soon as the wedding bells fell silent, reality came back into view. Chris's mother continued to meddle in our lives, and her criticism became more and more insistent. Every week, she chose a new cause for displeasure. And no matter how hard we tried to ignore her nagging, the tension in our marriage grew with each encounter. She kept telling Chris that I wasn't right for him, that I wasn't good at running a household, and that I didn't fit his status. I tried not to interfere in their conversations, but with each phrase that reached me, my heart clenched with pain. Over time, these conversations began to affect Chris's thoughts. I could see his confidence in our union beginning to fray at the seams. I tried to be the best wife I could be, running the household, keeping our home comfortable, but despite my best efforts, my mother-in-law continued to criticize me. I realized that this was a test not only for us, but also for our marriage. Less than a year later, we had our daughter, Emily. Every morning when I woke up and looked at her, I felt incredibly happy. However, strangely enough, this happiness seemed to distance me even more from Chris's mother. She couldn't even be pleased with the appearance of a granddaughter, and she continued to criticize everything about our lives. Every time I went to visit, she looked for faults. She didn't like the way we were raising Emily. She thought I wasn't being strict enough with my daughter and wasn't instilling decent values in her. She raised her voice daily, saying that I had no right to be her daughter-in-law. This led to conflicts that I tried to avoid. I never could understand what made her so adamant. She seemed to be the only one who could decide what was right and what was wrong. Every comment she made hurt, and it was hard to stay calm. Chris, though he was close to me, sometimes sided with his mother, ignoring my displeasure. He didn't want to fight with her, and that hurt me even more. I couldn't understand why he didn't notice how her advice was ruining everything we had built together. With each meeting, where I was met with recriminations instead of support, I could feel our family starting to fall apart. Our relationship began to change drastically. Now, every time I tried to talk to Chris about her behavior, he always skillfully avoided answering. It was horrible. I understood that he was trying to maintain balance, but at the same time, a sense of loneliness was growing inside of me. Emily was my comfort, but I needed support from Chris as well. At some point, Chris started spending more and more time with his friends, sometimes going away for entire weekends. I couldn't understand why he preferred going out and clubbing instead of spending time with his family. Emily was growing up, and she seemed to miss her father. Every time she looked into his room, hoping to see Chris, there was sadness in her eyes when he wasn't home. It depressed me, and I myself began to feel that his absence was affecting our family. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always used tiredness after work as an excuse to ignore our family life. There was a constant feeling of estrangement that robbed us of the warmth that used to fill our home. I remember one day Chris came in from a party, and I thought there was something new in his gaze, something I couldn't quite grasp. Small details began to appear in his behavior that had seemed inconsequential to me before, but now began to be disturbing. He spoke to me less willingly and was often lost in his thoughts. It was a new phase in our communication that worried me. I didn't realize at the time that it was only the first straw of frustration. The days went by and I searched for answers to my questions. I could feel the strife and misunderstandings pulling us further and further apart. The heavy thoughts were confirmed when Chris came home from a party one day, confused and unconcerned. He smelled of alcohol and feminine perfume. I, startled by what was going on, tried to ask him what was wrong. He evasively said that everything was fine. But I knew for sure that he was lying to me. My world shattered into pieces when I found out about the other woman. Chris confessed that there was someone in his life who, in his opinion, made him happy. The words, like shards of glass, cut me from the inside out, leaving deep wounds on my heart. I couldn't understand how things could have changed so much. It was a real catastrophe that hit us like a thunderbolt. Every day he got farther and farther away. I could feel the frustration slowly filling my soul. At that moment, I realized that Chris had found someone to replace me. The disappointment was suffocating me. I thought about our life crumbling like a house of cards. She'd always been so obsessed with her father, and now, her world was in danger of falling apart. We were suffering. And even my mother-in-law didn't seem to realize the damage she was doing with her criticism. She'd always thought I wasn't good enough for her son, and now that her predictions had come true, I couldn't escape the thought that it was partly her fault. In an effort to make Chris happy, she had turned him against our family, against me, and now the consequences were fatal. I needed to be strong, if not for myself, at least for my daughter. I decided to talk to Chris in a calm environment, without reproach or judgment, to find out how he really felt. I understood that there were issues between us, but I was willing to work on our relationship, not willing to stand by. Finally, Chris spoke to me, his voice shaking, and he admitted that he felt terrible. He now felt that we weren't right for each other, and it had dashed his hope for our future together. The girl he was already dating at that point was making him happy. Everything that had once seemed like a challenge to me now confirmed that I was standing on the edge of a precipice. Trying to fix what was happening was pointless. The divorce was proving to be an ordeal. Even though Chris was gone, I was plagued by resentment and doubt. All those years we spent together seemed completely empty to me. Why hadn't I seen him change? But at the same moment, deep down, I realized I didn't want to suffer anymore because of a man who didn't appreciate me. At the trial, I watched him and felt the rage inside of me flare up again. He was rushing to a new life, not even thinking about our little daughter. We were to meet again to decide how to share custody of Emily. After the divorce, I tried not to think about Chris, but the past was still painful. Now that we were separated, I began to focus on what was most important, raising Emily. I realized it was my responsibility, but it was hard sometimes, without Chris and his support. My mother-in-law, oddly enough, changed her strategy. She started sending me texts apologizing, but I just ignored them. After everything that had happened between us, I didn't feel like listening to her. Some time passed, and Chris's mom showed up in Emily and I's life. She clearly regretted that I was no longer her daughter-in-law. My mother-in-law showed up on my doorstep with flowers and a sincere apology. She said she realized her mistakes, admitted she was wrong. Initially, she should not have interfered in our relationship with Chris and criticized me. In her opinion, this was her way of showing her concern for Chris. But this apology couldn't make things right. My mother-in-law criticized and humiliated me for years, and as a result, our marriage to her son broke down. Despite the hardships, I decided to start a new life. I spent more time with Emily. We did different interesting things together, drawing, walking, and reading books. At the same time, I was gaining confidence and decided to pursue my hobbies. I started writing, expressing my thoughts and feelings on paper. My mother-in-law kept going around trying to convince me that she was truly sorry for what had happened. She was no longer against me, but now she was against the fact that her son had chosen someone else. It had been 2 years since the divorce. Emily and I had come to terms with Chris' departure from our family, and now it resonated with a slight sadness in our hearts. I was no longer angry at my mother-in-law, but only sighed regretfully. This new phase of life was scary, but I had a daughter who was more important to me than anything else in the world. Nevertheless, I realized that time heals, and instead of hating my mother-in-law, I had understanding and forgiveness. I didn't go back to past hurts, I moved on.